Funding for the Maddy Report is made possible by grants from Comcast, the Spencer family, Chevron, Community Health System, Harris Ranch Resort, Producers Dairy, Caleb and Desiree House, Valley Children's Health Care, and The Wonderful Company. Additional support provided by from the Maddy Institute, the Public Policy Institute for the Valley's public universities. This is the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Blake Zanti.
Welcome to the Maddy Report. Today we'll be discussing Governor Gavin Newsom's budget proposal and its key components, as well as the state's budgeting process, with Joe Stephenshaw, Director of the California Department of Finance. Many may not fully understand how California's budget process works or how decisions about state spending are made. In this segment, we'll explore the key aspects and steps of the budget process and explain how the governor and the Department of Finance and the legislature work together to create and manage the state budget. Joe, thank you so much for joining the Maddy Report today. Really appreciate you being on the program.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, we're honored to have you. And just to start off this segment, as the Director of Finance, what are some of the roles and responsibilities you take on as it pertains to the governor's budget?
We are most known for, and probably our most important responsibility, is we build the California state budget for the governor. So his budget proposal to the legislature, which we're constitutionally required to present to the legislature by January 10th of each year. Our department here builds that for the governor, obviously at his direction, his or her direction. And then we work through the legislative budget process, which entails working with the legislature, mainly the budget committees of both houses. We go before the committees, we present and defend the governor's budget proposals. Eventually, we have a final revision to the budget in May that we present by May 14th. And then from there, obviously, we work on negotiating a final budget, represent the governor in that process with the legislature so they can meet their constitutional deadline in mid-June.
And you mentioned the May revise. Could you explain the May revise process and its importance to the budget process?
Yeah, it's really one of the most important points in the budget process, and it is our last update to the governor's budget proposal. And I think probably one of the most important aspects of the May revise is we update our economic and more importantly for the budget revenue forecast at the May revision, and that's really the framework typically for the final budget in terms of what the structure of the budget has in its support in terms of revenue and what we're forecasting, not only revenue that we've collected, but forecasting for the budget year. And we also, with each cycle, project out to 3 fiscal years past the budget year. And so that's probably one of the most important aspects of the May revision. Then we do have, it's our final kind of update, so there's typically new proposals that are presented to the legislature. There's always going to be caseload changes, updates to population-driven programs and caseload-driven programs, and that's really the sprint from there of our final update to the budget through to the Budget Act, which there's not a lot of time. There's been a lot of changes over the years, different propositions that have impacted the timing of when the budget has to get done, and really limited the time that we have. But the May revise is really the final point from the administration in presenting the complete proposals to the legislature for them to be able to do what they need to do in order to get to the final Budget Act.
Now, you mentioned the final Budget Act, after the May revise happens and the legislature has to meet its constitutional deadline. Could you talk a little bit about the process after that? Does the governor then have to sign the Budget Act, and then does he have the opportunity to weigh in and potentially veto certain provisions of that Budget Act? What does that process look like?
Yeah, so after we present the May revise, again, both houses of the legislature will typically hold budget subcommittee hearings, and those subcommittees are specific to different policy areas. And so, for example, in each house, they have a subcommittee on education. And so those subcommittees will really do the deep dives and hear every single aspect of the budget related to their respective policy areas. And then they'll quickly move to full budget committee hearings, and those where all the kind of reports from the subcommittees come up for each house to really set their mark on their changes to our budget.
Thank you. We're going to take a quick break. Up next, we'll discuss some of the key components of California's budget process. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're continuing our conversation, taking a closer look at California's budget process with Joe Stephenshaw, Director of the Department of Finance for the state of California. Joe, thanks for joining us on the program today. Really appreciate your time. You were talking in the previous segment about the budget bill, the Budget Act, that is eventually goes through the legislative process and then is approved by the governor. You talked about the different committees and subcommittees that bill has to go through. Could you talk a little bit more in depth about that process? How much change do we typically see with that Budget Act from the initial proposal that the governor rolls out in January? Do we typically see a lot of change historically, or does it remain largely consistent and the legislature sort of uses the governor's proposal as a model going forward?
Yeah, so it's something that has kind of evolved over time, and every year, every budget is different. But I think typically now we will see some significant changes and differences, particularly from the governor's January budget proposal through the final Budget Act, and that's not only from the changes that the legislature makes, but also the changes that the governor will propose throughout the process, most significantly at the May revision, as we discussed earlier. There's a few reasons for this, but one of the biggest reasons, even from the administration side, in terms of changes that the governor may propose to the budget, is that we've seen more volatility and changes in our conditions, both economic and for our state's revenues from the governor's budget to the May revision. And as I mentioned earlier, really having that point at the May revise of updating the forecast really is going to inform the changes that the governor has to make to ensure that we're presenting a sound and responsible fiscal plan ultimately to the legislature. And then through the legislative process, as I mentioned, as they go through those budget subcommittees, each subcommittee will take votes on the specific individual items that the governor is proposing in the budget. And so they can make changes. They could, in their versions of the budget, they could reduce the level of funding. They could reject the proposal outright. They could add specific reporting requirements. So they typically do make a number of changes. They also will typically add their own priorities that may not be reflected in the governor's proposal. And so there will be a number of changes that do occur throughout the process. And then, at the end, we all will come together and figure out compromises that get to the ultimate spending plan.
Yeah, it's certainly democracy in action going through that process. Could you talk a little bit more? This might be a little bit more nuanced, but maybe just touch on this. What are finance letters, and how does the Department of Finance use them in the spring to propose adjustments to the governor's budget?
Yeah, finance letters, simply are those are really the vessel by which we present changes to the legislature, and so we when we present our updates through the budget, there's different points in the process. April 1, we will is another point where we do propose some changes, and we do those through finance letters, and those will specify specific items in the budget, and then lay out the detail of the changes that we're proposing to those items. And I get kind of technical here, but when the governor presents his budget to the legislature, each house of the legislature then puts a bill in print that reflects the governor's budget, and that is comprised of appropriations that are the mechanisms for providing money for each specific department, agency, department, and purpose. And so our finance letters will note the changes that we're making through budget items, and they'll do it by those appropriations. And so we'll do that at different points in the process. The most significant points being April 1, which is primarily technical changes that we're making, and then May revise. You'll see some of the more substantive changes.
Thank you, Mr. Stephenshaw. We'll be right back after this break. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back to the Maddy Report. Now we'll take a closer look at Governor Newsom's budget proposal for this upcoming fiscal year. Thank you again, Joe Stephenshaw, Director of the California Department of Finance, for joining us today. To start off, maybe if you could just touch on this, what were some of the main issue areas or priority areas that Governor Newsom is focusing on in this specific budget proposal?
Yeah, so the January budget, the governor's budget from January, really took the approach of presenting a workload budget to the legislature and did not include significant new proposed investments from the administration, particularly general fund. And this was because of a few factors, but primarily due to the shortfalls that we've experienced in our budget the last few years, and some projected structural shortfalls that we are seeing in our projections going forward. And the governor felt it's prudent to ensure we take some time to assess how things changed between January and the May revision. And as we've spoke about a little bit earlier, we've seen some significant changes in those time periods, and so the governor felt it was prudent to take time, assess the changes between January and May, and really use May, once we have those final revenues updates, to present any significant changes that must be necessary. But this year, first and foremost, at the top of the governor's priorities are to ensure that that we are making sufficient progress in ensuring that we have manageable structural budget or fiscal framework going forward, and then also in part because it's his last budget, and want to ensure that he continues to leave the state in good fiscal standing, but then also to focus on all of the significant investments that have been made over the last 7 years, and many that are transformational. For example, in the education space, where we've moved towards now universal meals for all students, TK for all, the expanded before, after school, summer programs, a number of programs that really are providing wraparound support to our students and increasing the ability for students to focus on the work. And we're beginning to actually see that in the outcomes of students' test scores, and seeing some success there.
Now, you just noted, Joe, that the budget doesn't really include any major new investments in healthcare, but it's continuing to sort of build on a lot of the progress of prior budgets and make still some significant smaller investments. What are some of the new major investments in healthcare priorities, and what impacts will these investments have?
The governor and this administration, along with the legislature, we've made some significant investments in healthcare over the last few years, most notably expansion of healthcare, Medi-Cal for all, regardless of immigration status, but also with CalAIM that provides support services and really aimed at providing the services and treatment to keep people out of more costly services. And so we've focused on continuing those investments, but we did include some changes in the current year budget that that were needed in order to control some of the costs that we're seeing in Medi-Cal, which is still an issue. In terms of investments in the proposed budget in January, really the new investments, the significant ones were centered on um, uh, uh, the cost to the state as a result of the impacts of HR 1, the federal legislation, and a couple of the significant areas there were related to changes in definitions of who is covered at the federal level. There was also some impacts outside of Medi-Cal in CalFresh that were also reflected in the budget, and that increased costs for the state by hundreds of millions of dollars related to the changing of the administrative ratio of how much the federal government will pick up as compared to the state, and increasing the state's share there.
Thank you. And Medi-Cal, CalFresh, all programs that definitely have a significant impact in the San Joaquin Valley. We'll be right back after this break. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. Joe Stephenshaw, Director of the California Department of Finance. Thank you again for joining us on the Maddy Report today. Really appreciate your time and insights about California's budget process and some of the key priorities in this final budget for Governor Newsom. Before you go, I'd just like to continue our conversation about some of the investments that this budget proposes. And of course, you know, we'll see them go through the process. But as you noted, some of the ongoing investments that the budget makes in K through 14 education, the budget proposes a $1 billion ongoing Proposition 98 fund to expand the community school model. How are these funds used, and how will they impact California students over time in the future?
Yeah, I mean, that's just one of the many investments, and that is an area. I mentioned some of the major initiatives we have pursued in K through 12 schools earlier over the last few years, but that's also one area in Prop 98 where we were able to make some significant new investments. And that community schools is kind of along the lines of those kind of the change to offering the comprehensive supports, or ensuring there's comprehensive support in our education system, particularly for underrepresented students. And that is specifically what the community school-based model is meant to do, is really provide, ensure that there's all the services in one place that students need to allow them to have a comfortable environment to learn in. We also were able to provide a one-time significant block grant of $2.8 billion for school districts in recognition of some of the increased cost pressures that they face. We were able to provide investments to continue progress on special education, equalizing funding across the state. So in the areas of school K through 14, which is covered by Prop 98, that's one area where we were able to make some significant new investments in this budget that continue to build upon the really transformational progress that we've been able to make in the last few years. Then our last thing I will note, just outside even of the general fund, we continue to, to maximize investments that we can make with other funding. As an example, the climate bond that was passed by voters recently, we are appropriating another $2.1 billion out of that bond that will help communities across the state as we deal with combating the numerous effects of climate change.
Thank you, Joe. And lastly, before we wrap up, something that has been a priority for the governor during his tenure, housing and affordable housing in the state of California. How does the budget plan to continue supporting affordable housing programs and programs for unhoused communities throughout the state of California?
Yeah, so still a top priority and area where progress has been made. We're starting to see some reductions in the level of our unhoused populations, or the level of growth in the unhoused populations, and the so the budget continues the effort that began last year, and really at the state level, streamlining, consolidating services for housing and homelessness by creating the new housing agency. And so we're continuing that work and ensuring that we're not only moving all of the programs, but now all of the responsibility for the funding that supports programs to ensure there's efficiencies and comprehensive approach to how we're dealing with those issues to continue to improve the state's ability to help locals address this significant problem. We also, there's been so many bills through the years, including last year's budget, related to being able to streamline the production of housing, particularly affordable housing. So a lot of those efforts are underway now and moving forward. Lastly, there's $500 million that was for the upcoming budget year that was part of the current year budget deal, but it's slated to go out in 26, 27. And that is dependent on some additional accountability requirements. And that's also something that's been very important to the governor as the state has continued to invest more and more to address the housing needs and homelessness, that there are accountability measures that go along with that to ensure that the money is being spent and utilized as intended and as efficiently as possible.
Thank you so much for joining the Maddy Report today. You have a very important job, and our viewers just really appreciate your time shedding some light on the budget process, how it works in a very big state like California, and also some of the key priorities that are in this budget. Again, thanks for joining the Maddy Report today.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. And thank you for tuning into the Maddy Report. To learn more about the Maddy Institute, visit themaddyinstitute.org. The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about today's episode of the Maddy Report, please visit our website at maddyinstitute.com.